Or evening, depending where you're viewing us from. We have over 160 people registered today, so hopefully we'll be seeing quite a few people today. And you're welcome to turn your camera on. It's always nice to see who's there and see your smiling faces. We'll just give it another minute while people come in. As we are today hosting our guests from Johannesburg. So we've got both hemispheres, a lot of different hemispheres and different continents. People are still coming in. Oh, we've still got, we'll give this another minute or so. We're just got a few more people coming in and we'll get started. We have someone from Montreal who's here today. The participants are able to only chat, send the chat to us, so I get messages. So if you would like to tell us where you're from, we're happy to share that. It's always nice to see where people come from. All right, we're Kingston, Ontario. Great. And another one from Toronto, Philadelphia, my old hometown. London, England. It's tea time there for your evening tea. And Manchester. Okay, we've still got some people coming in, so we'll wait before we start officially so everyone can get settled. San Diego, Florida, the Netherlands, and Amsterdam, Manitoba, Dallas. It really is a classroom without borders. It's wonderful to that we have such a global reach. So I think we are another few coming in. Someone said I'd like to say Helm, but it wouldn't be true. I'm sure there are lots of jokes we can make about Helm. This is great. I'll definitely save the chat for this so we can tally where everyone's from. It's really quite exciting. Israel, Haifa, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. All right. So it's 4 after, so we've got a good long program today, so I'd like to get started. Thank you for joining us today for our new series, The Holocaust as an Interdisciplinary Tapestry, Classrooms Without Borders, in coordination with Tali Nates, founder and director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, Vadin Shahar, director of Talking Memory online lecture series and international education programs, the Ghetto Fighters House, and Esther Topher, founder, member of the GSI Coordinating Council, Generations of the Shoah International, and in partnership with Liberation 75. Altogether, our partners were pleased to embark on this innovative series. The 8-part series is engaging with scholars and experts who grapple with themes related to Holocaust studies. The series includes scholars whose research and publications shed new light in this field of study that continues to grow and develop. Our experts will challenge us to understand the causes, impacts, and legacies of the Holocaust. Today's session focuses on achieving legal accountability for World War II Nazi crimes, experiences of the Israel National Police and U.S. Department of Justice, with our guests Eli M. Rosenbaum and Dr. Tamir Hod. For those of you joining us for the first time, or those who may not recognize me, my name is Erica Fox-Zabuski. I'm Operations Manager with Classrooms Without Borders, filling in for Ellen Resnick, who is on a well-deserved vacation. We are really grateful for your support over the years, and especially these past 3 years of navigating an expanded presence for classrooms while also supporting our robust offerings. Over the past 3 years alone, we have offered 440 virtual programs with over 75,000 registered people, reaching almost 60 countries and most of the states in the United States. If you'd like to make a donation to support the organization, I'll put the link in the chat for you. But now I have the pleasure of introducing today's moderator, Tali Nates. Tali is the founder and director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center and chair of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation. She's a historian who lectures internationally on Holocaust and genocide education, memory, reconciliation, and human rights. Born to a family of Holocaust survivors, her father and uncle were saved by Oskar Schindler. And we are able to take questions. So you're able to send your questions to me in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them all. So before we turn the program over to Tali to introduce today's scholars, Esther Funter would like to say a few words of welcome. Esther, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I've known Eli Rosenbaum for a long time and have always admired him personally and professionally. In his work hunting Nazis who came to the US, he has examined World War II history in ways most of us never could and looked into the eyes of mass murderers. To be sure, the scales of justice can never be balanced when it comes to the Holocaust, but this one man, himself the son of a survivor, has done incredible work. Now he's been tapped by the US Attorney General Merrick Garland to look into atrocities being committed today in Ukraine. He is still doing the work of trying to repair the world. It's my honor to welcome my dear friend Eli to the Tapestry series.
Thank you very much, Esther, for your warm welcome and for indeed organizing for Eli to leave what he's doing now, such important work in Ukraine, and join us tonight to be part of this Tapestry series. And with us tonight is also our friend, Dr. Tamir Hod, that is joining us all the way from Israel. And of course, Tamir and Eli worked before on different projects and on projects that Tamir is busy with at the moment. But first of all, I would like to welcome everyone from all around the world that are joining this new series that we started last month. Many of you joined our last series about museums and memorials around the world, which was a wonderful, wonderful series that took us all around the world. This time with Esther, with GSI, Generations of the Shoah Foundation, an idea was born. And the idea was to learn about the Holocaust, but from different disciplines, to look at the Holocaust from different viewpoints. And this 8-part series started last month with a brilliant, emotional, moving talk by Dr. Robert Krell about psychiatry in the Holocaust. And of course, we are moving totally to a different topic today to look at legal accountability, Nazi hunting, finding the perpetrators wherever they are, even 80 years later, and wherever they are today will be seen from two viewpoints, one from the United States and the other from Israel. And with us, we have the pleasure of welcoming really two of the leading experts in this field to share some of their work with us. We are honored to start with Eli Rosenbaum, who was so aptly and warmly presented to us by Esther. And just to share with you a very, very short bio, and as usual, I will put Eli's full bio in the chat. Eli Rosenbaum is the longest serving investigator and prosecutor of Nazi war criminals and other human rights violations in world history, as we heard, even now in the war, the very cruel war of Russia against Ukraine. Please do send your questions, your comments, as usual. After Eli, I will present to you Tamir Hod, and then we will have a conversation with Eli and Tamir. Eli, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tali. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, especially Esther, for that very moving introduction, which touched me deeply. I want to say, without disrespecting any of the sponsors, that particularly meaningful for me that GSI is sponsoring this. I have spoken at one of their conventions. Esther is a leader in the organization, and they do amazing work to preserve the memory of the Shoah, and also Ghetto Fighters House, Lochnei HaGhettot. Back when I was a young prosecutor in, I think, 1982, making my first official visit as a U.S. government prosecutor to Israel, I made it point to go visit Kibbutz Lochnei HaGhettot, where the museum is. And I didn't have a rental car, so I took a series of buses, and that was one long trip from Tel Aviv, but it was well worth it. It's an extremely moving experience. And as I recall at the time, that was where you could see the glass booth in which a bulletproof glass booth in which Adolf Eichmann was tried in Jerusalem in 1961. It's since been moved, I think, to Yad Vashem. Anyway, and it's also great to share a virtual stage with my friend, Professor Tamir Hod, and I look forward to learning from him today again. So I thought I should give a sort of capsule history of what we've done in my country in the Nazi cases, how we did it, what the obstacles were, some that we surmounted, some that we could not. After World War II, it was considerable Allied prosecutorial effort, most famously at Nuremberg, but in thousands and thousands of other trials that victorious Allied powers held, and also that were held in newly liberated nations in Europe, like France and the Netherlands. But Allied enthusiasm for pursuing justice on behalf of the victims of Nazi crimes waned very quickly as the hot war became history, and the Cold War took precedence. So it became of primary importance for the Soviet side and the other U.S. and its allies to fight that war, even though it did not involve actual combat. And each side, therefore, decided that it needed its part of Germany in its corner, so to speak. And it became ultimately very easy to kind of sweep this all under the rug. And so prosecutorial efforts by the Allies largely ended by the early 50s. And so since newly independent, or anyway, since the new Germany was not particularly interested in these cases, as they belatedly acknowledged in this new century, because of the sheer number of people who were involved in the crimes, and the fact that there were ex-Nazis in the judiciary and prosecution services, not very much was being done. In the United States, there were allegations that began surfacing around 1950 that in the large population of immigrants that we took after the war, some Nazi criminals had managed to insinuate themselves, so to speak, masquerading as victims of persecution. The U.S. Justice Department, through its immigration service mostly, looked into some of these allegations. They brought a few cases. With two exceptions, they lost them all. So by the 1970s, my agency had in effect thrown up its arms and said, we can't win these cases. We don't have the expertise. It's too hard to prove crimes that took place decades earlier on the other side of the vast ocean, where crimes were committed in a manner intended to physically eliminate those people who, had they survived, might have been inclined to cooperate with, would have been inclined, we think, to cooperate with a government investigation. Also, most of the survivors never learned the names of their former tormentors. Guards at the Nazi camps didn't wear name tags. So the government kind of gave up. After that, it becomes a classic Washington story. Starting in the late 60s, the New York Times got on the trail of potential Nazi criminals in America. And by the mid 70s, they were publishing quite a few articles identifying suspects. Ralph Blumenthal was the author of most of those. Fabulous reporting. Again, it's classic Washington story. You have all these articles, and other articles ensued in newspapers in Philadelphia, Chicago, elsewhere. Eventually, this came to the attention of members of Congress, particularly Elizabeth Holtzman, who represented Brooklyn. She instigated the holding of hearings in 1976 and 77, where government officials were forced to testify, and they basically acknowledged that they weren't doing anything. And then almost single-handedly, Liz Holtzman forced the then Carter administration to create a special unit, which they did in 1979, the Office of Special Investigations, to investigate, to identify, investigate, and where the evidence could be amassed, to prosecute Nazi criminals who had come to the United States. Our jurisdiction was limited. We did not and do not have criminal jurisdiction in Nazi cases for the reason that there was no American criminal law or books during World War II that criminalized genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the like when committed in another country. And of course, all the World War II crimes were committed. Holocaust crimes were committed in Europe. So we were left with civil jurisdiction, which meant we could bring suit to revoke the citizenships of these people. We'd have to prove usually that they committed fraud, but they almost always lied about their pasts to get into the United States, not always. And then if we succeeded in that, we could bring a separate proceeding in U.S. Immigration Court to obtain an order of deportation, or as we say today, removal. The bottom line on that, though, was that with all the appellate opportunities that were available to these people, anyone with modestly capable counsel could easily extend these proceedings for 8 to 12 years, maybe even more. And so when we started, we were told in 1979, and I remember it because I was a summer law intern that year, and I joined the following year after graduating law school. We were told, work as fast as you responsibly can, because these people are already senior citizens, most of them, and their lawyers are going to use every delaying tactic in the books to extend these proceedings with the goal of having their clients die in freedom in the United States. And that was certainly the strategy for most of them. There was no playbook for what we set out to do. I mean, the government, as I mentioned, had lost almost all of its previous cases, so there wasn't much to learn from that. We started from scratch. We had early on a director of OSI of our office who had been a prosecutor at Nuremberg, so he was able to put in place really smart strategies, as had his predecessor, Martin Mendelsohn. The big breakthrough for us, I think, on the investigative side was realized pretty early that what we did not need was a large cadre of investigators, classic, gumshoe types. We had a whole lot of them, and they were accustomed to investigating domestic crimes. They didn't have a background in what happened in Europe in World War II. What we realized is that what we really needed were historians. And we started hiring historians who had degrees, usually PhDs in modern European history, particularly with a focus on what happened to. And I'll get back to that later, but that's a model that was subsequently followed by Canada, Australia, and England when they set up units patterned on the OSI model. It is, I believe, still we still have them in our successor office, which is the Human Rights and Special Prosecution section. I believe the International Criminal Court may have them as well. So when we started, we were told, look, given the difficulty of these cases and how poorly prosecution efforts had fared in the past, if you win, 5 or 10 cases, that'll be terrific. You will have put all the perpetrators in this country on notice that you're looking for them, and their day in the dock may come as well. We were told that it was highly unlikely that we'd actually be able to remove anyone because of the length of time that these proceedings take. So I'm relieved to be able to report that we brought over 130 cases. We won the numbers. I used to know them by heart, but we won the majority of those cases. We reported scores of Nazis from the United States. They ran on a continuum from one cabinet official of an Axis government that was Andrea Artukovic, who was Minister of the Interior and Justice Minister, ironically, of Croatia during World War II. And we found at the U.S. National Archives here in Washington, the Library of Congress here in Washington, published books published by the Croatian government during World War II containing decrees, official decrees. And in those volumes, you see decrees signed or co-signed by Artukovic, setting up a nationwide concentration camp system, ordering that children whose parents were sought for assignment to camps but escaped, but if the children were left behind, the children could be sent there, should be sent there. Another decree, series of decrees requiring Jews to wear identifying markings on their clothes and other requirements patterned on the infamous Nuremberg laws, and another one expropriating the property of every Jewish man with a child in Croatia. He was already very, very old and had been the subject of failed efforts by Justice Department for our creation. But we revived the case, and eventually in the 1980s, we extradited him to what was then Yugoslavia. He was tried, convicted, sentenced to death, but he was in very poor health, and the sentence wasn't carried out. He died in a prison hospital. I think it's fair to say that whatever your position is on capital punishment, pro or con, we can at least agree that it is a strange situation when someone is deemed too ill to be put to death. So on the one hand, you had someone at that level. The vast majority of our subjects and defendants were what one might call trigger pullers of the Holocaust. People like Yuri Fyodorovich, who was a collaborationist police officer in Lviv, in German-occupied Ukraine, and evidence found there included handwritten reports that he authored and signed, accounting for ammunition that he used in shooting Jews. Said that, so many words. I will never forget being part of the team that questioned him and having him finally admit with his lawyer at his side that he did that. We won our citizenship case, and then he vanished. We found him in Paraguay. The Paraguayans refused to do anything to him. Alexander Stalakas, a higher level figure. He was a chief of the Lithuanian Auxiliary Police, the analog to the Gestapo, for all of Vilnius province. Of course, to Jews, Vilnius is Vilna, legendary city in Jewish history, one of the premier capitals of Jewish religious, cultural, and political life. in the whole world to Poles. It's Vilno. We questioned him. I questioned him actually, and he admitted that he had served in that function, in that position. But he said when I asked him that he had never had anything to do with Jews, no, Germans did that on their own. Something I heard and my colleagues heard from a lot of people. Question that was always nonsense, and we proved that when one of our historians became, I think, probably the first person to get into Lithuanian archives after the Soviets, after Soviets had sort of left around 1991. And there he found document after document signed by the Lakis consigning individual Jews by name to the killing unit, which then executed them at giant pits of wooded hamlet of Lithuanian Panarai, Yiddish Panar, and Polish Panari. And I wish I had time to show you some of those documents. They're absolutely heartbreaking. We won that case. His citizenship was revoked, and while the deportation case was pending, he fled to Lithuania. We thought, well, that's not bad. We tried to deport him to Europe. They have criminal jurisdiction, which we don't. But they resisted putting him on trial. There's enormous pressure from the United States, the Clinton administration, from the Israelis, from the Wiesenthal Center, my friend Zorov in particular. And ultimately, they put on what I consider to have been a sham trial, which was halted on day one for health reasons, ostensibly. Well, health reasons. He lived for another few years, and he was well enough to write his defiant autobiography after they suspended the trial. Another case, Jacob Reimer. I should say Lelekis lived in Massachusetts. Theodorovich lived in Troy, New York. Jacob Reimer was living just north of New York City. And he served at the Travnicki SS training and base camp in German-occupied Poland. And he was an interesting case. The U.S. knew that he had served there, but when he was immigrating, he insisted that it was regular military service, and the U.S. didn't know otherwise. In fact, some of you may know that John Demjanjuk, who was trained there before becoming a death camp guard at Sobibor, on his U.S. visa application, he said that he was in Travnicki, Poland from late 30s year to 1943. And red flags should have gone up when he immigrated. What's a Ukrainian doing in the middle of no place, Poland, in a little town that Travnicki, that's even today hard to find on the map. But these U.S. immigration authorities, State Department, had never heard of Travnicki. And so Reimer's lie worked, and so did Demjanjuk's. In any event, we questioned Reimer in 1992 at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan. And that's an interview I'll never forget. First denied that he took part in any operations against Jews or other civilians. By the time it was over, he admitted to me that he had led a platoon of men on an operation to, as he put it, pretty close to exact, liquidate a Jewish labor camp. And then he tried, when he decided that maybe I didn't know about it, he tried to backtrack and say, well, we went out with men, we had to spend the night in the forest, and I overslept, and they went without me. Had to make clear that that's not credible. Then he said, the men don't leave without the command officer. Then he said he tripped over a log on the way to the killing site, and they went without him, and that, of course, makes no sense either. Finally, he admitted that he was there and that he participated in the shooting, and at least to shooting one person. That got the quota as far as we were concerned, and we brought suit to revoke his citizenship. Unfortunately, the case lingered in federal court in Manhattan for years. We finally got him to trial, and the judge had it under advisement for years after the trial, and we finally won. But too much time had been lost in that legal proceeding and managed to die in the United States. Last example I'll give, again, lower level perpetrator. I'm sorry, next to last example, not a low level perpetrator. As I said, they didn't all lie to get into the United States. Arthur Rudolph is a good example. He was a German missile rocket engineer as part of the Werner von Braun team. And during the war, he was operations director of an underground B-2 missile factory that was part of the Dora-Nordhausen concentration camp in Germany. Prisoners were sent there from Dora-Nordhausen and worked under grotesquely inhumane conditions that caused them to die. Large numbers. Rudolph, the whole case now, but Rudolph, among other things, had ordered the prisoners, assembled to view the mass hanging of other prisoners who were suspected of sabotage, and they were slowly hanged from a crane that was used to move rockets. So they struggled for a long time on those cases. After the war, he and von Braun and others were recruited by the United States. It was a mad rush after the war by the Soviets, the Americans, French, British, I think the Argentinians, well, to recruit those men. We got the most capable of them, and one of them was Rudolph. And he was put to work on a U.S. military missile program. And then after President Kennedy announced in 1961, following his inauguration, that we would attempt a lunar landing within the decade, von Braun, Rudolph, and the others transferred over to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, where Rudolph was put in charge of building the Saturn V rocket. So it is a sad part of American history that the rocket that took humankind to the moon in 1969 was built by a Nazi slave master. A colleague and I interviewed him. He made some very damning admissions. We had a lot of really strong documentary evidence, and eventually he agreed through his lawyer to just give up his citizenship and leave the country permanently. He went back to his native Germany. We shared our evidence with the Germans, and as almost always was the case, they declined to prosecute. The last case I'll give very briefly, Friedrich Berger. That may well be our final Nazi case. It's, after all, 2023 now. But just 2 years ago, well, let's say 3 years ago, we had a trial in Memphis, Tennessee, state in which he was living. He had been a guard at a subcamp of the Neuengamme concentration camp. In Germany, we won a removal order after proving what he did at the camp, which was really challenging since there were no survivors of this small subcamp interview. And the Germans had destroyed almost all of the documents of the camp. But we are really good at piecing together these seemingly impossible World War II puzzles. And when we won the case in 2020, it became the oldest crimes ever proved in a court of law in the United States against the defendant. The span between the commission of the crimes and our victory in court was 75 years. And I like to mention that because I think it goes to a quality that I so admire in my colleagues, which is that they never give up. They just never, ever give up. How did we do it? There's a Hollywood conception. I think best exemplified by the movie Marathon Man. So that older viewers may remember that. And there's a dramatic scene where the Nazi doctor, SS doctor character makes the mistake of going to New York, to the Diamond District of New York, where in the 1970s, when that movie was made, a lot of Jewish survivors were working. And he's recognized on the street by an elderly woman survivor who calls out his name and gives chase. But he gets away. Well, that's great cinema. It's really fabulous, but it's not the way these things happen. And we got all kinds of tips over the decades. We tended to call them, "My neighbor is a Nazi." We checked them out where there was any possibility that they could be right, but those never yielded a prosecutable case. We did it in a different way. First, there were foreign governments, mostly the Soviets, who were trying to track these people down, and they shared information with us. But after a few years, we exhausted those leads. And as a result of an initiative of my boss and mentor, the late friend, dear friend, the late Neil Scher, we started becoming really proactive. And the main methodology for us is we tasked our staff historians with keeping an eye out for Nazi personnel rosters, wanted, Allied wanted lists and the like, of people who might reasonably be suspected of participating in Nazi crimes, mostly because they had served in units that did that. And we brought back all that data, more than 70,000 names, and ran the names systematically against US immigration records and other immigration records, with different spellings of names, transliterations from Russian, other languages. That's how the vast majority of our suspects were identified. Then, of course, the investigation in chief begins. That's where the historians come in to look for documents. It's where our lawyers come in to question the suspects. That our cases almost always were based on great work by historians and great work by our attorneys. Our not so secret weapons, historians, and then the survivor witnesses, the heroes of our cases, the people who opened psychological wounds that can never heal. It did it in public on witness stands in courts throughout the country, so that American judges who had never experienced anything remotely approaching the nightmare of the Holocaust and other Nazi crimes that we prosecuted, but mostly Holocaust cases, could begin to understand the reality of what transpired from the standpoint of the victims. And their testimony was powerful and influential and made a big difference. Especially because Professor Hud is here and there are other Israelis on this class. I want to say we brought survivor witnesses in from all over the world. And one government, Israeli government, made sure that their survivor witnesses were accompanied by a law enforcement official. And that usually was the late, great Colonel Menachem Rissik of the Israeli National Police War Crimes Unit, who I know figures heavily in the work that Professor Hud is doing right now. Obstacles, quickly, there were numerous, the worst of them being, Mother Nature or Father Time, whichever you prefer. Again, these people were seniors pretty much when we started, so we were racing the clock like no other prosecutors in the world, and sometimes Mother Nature won. Either they became mentally incapable of going to trial or they died. There were also some suicides. There were opposition groups. We faced enormous opposition from various groups, particularly Baltic and Ukrainian American groups. So it's sort of ironic now that I am fighting with every ounce of strength I have to secure a measure of justice on behalf of victims in Ukraine. Today, it's a very different country. But they were relentless in opposing us. They had allies like Patrick Buchanan, who will be known to Americans, I think, in this class, attacked us viciously, even from the White House publicly when we served there. We had limited help from foreign governments. The German government was great on the investigative side, but when we tried to actually deport someone, whenever they could, they refused. I've not said it often, and most people don't know it, but they even refused to take John Tanyanya. We found a way around that. Finally, pretty much put them in a position where they had to let him in, because we had worked with great investigative magistrates and prosecutors in Germany, and with the result that he was indicted. And so the Germans had to withdraw their refusal to take him, because he was now, of course, actually wanted in Germany. The denouement of that, I say that for the benefit of whoever's in Canada, in France, was that he was tried and convicted in Germany of some 28,000 murders, complicity in some 28,000 murders committed at Civil War death camp. And he died shortly thereafter. We had the Austrian government, which had not prosecuted a Nazi case since the 1970s. for a time refused to assist us because they were unhappy with the fact that the Justice Department, OSI, my old office, had investigated their former president, then President Kurt Waldheim, former Secretary General of the United Nations, and proved his complicity in Nazi crimes. You can see the internal, very long OSI report at the Justice Department website. And so they stopped cooperating with us. And eventually they agreed to discuss this issue. My boss and I were considered too controversial as interlocutors because of our respective roles in the Waldheim case. So it fell to my deputy, Michael Bernstein, as dedicated a pursuer of justice I've ever had the privilege of knowing. And he went to Vienna, persuaded the Austrians to relent, and then endeavored to return to the United States. He changed his flight at London Heathrow Airport. Sorry, it doesn't get any easier. To get home for Hanukkah, early, to his wife Stephanie and his little children, Sarah and Joey. A few hours earlier, and he ended up on Pan American World Airways Flight 103 and was killed with some 270 other people on board the plane and on the ground at Lockheed Scotland. But I said the Justice Department doesn't give up, and that's another example. Some of you will know that the alleged bomb maker who brought down that flight was finally taken into U.S. custody this year, 35 years later, and he is going to trial. Anyway, there were lots of countries in Europe refused to take these people back, with the result that a fair number of them had died here because no one took them. So the real issue is political will. You can, in so many cases, surmount the evidentiary challenges, the delaying tactics of defense counsel, the lies of suspects and defendants. But if there's a lack of political will, as there was in my country before 1979, as we've seen in Germany until really the last 10 or 15 years, in Austria, since the 1970s and on, then nothing will happen. So let me close by just saying what some of you will know, which is I now spend probably 95% of my time on Russia-Ukraine matters. Last year, Attorney General Merrick Garland asked me to take charge of our war crimes accountability efforts. We have jurisdiction in cases where U.S. citizens are the victims of war crimes. We have evidence that's happened. We are investigating. We already have identified suspects. We're also assisting our Ukrainian colleagues constantly, also authorities in other countries of Europe that are investigating these cases. So as in the Holocaust cases, one has one's heart broken every day. I feel, we all feel especially close to our very brave Ukrainian colleagues in the Prosecutor General's office, but also law enforcement investigators who are investigating these cases, and you have to see crime scenes, unbelievably horrible crime scenes, and photographs, videos. And I was listening to a Broadway show the other day to cheer myself up, and I was a man of La Mancha. And there's a line in the classic song, they're being willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. And that's what our Ukrainian colleagues do every day. One of them already paid with her life in a missile attack. Finally, often asked, why do this? Why do these cases? It's a long time ago, at least the World War II cases are. And I think the answer is, look, there's no statute of limitations in civilized countries on murder. It's as long as there are families, surviving victims, families who are mourning those victims, justice should continue to be pursued. But I think the main reason is to send a message to would-be perpetrators of war crimes, and especially thinking, of course, now Russia. They need to pay attention. They need to see these images of old people like John Tanyanya going on trial in Germany, or the Lakis in our country, or even our tutelage, and realize that if they dare to follow criminal orders, or worse yet, issue them, that there's a good chance that what remains of the civilized world will pursue them for however long it takes to the last days that they walk on this earth. And I'm really, really proud to have worked all these years with great colleagues here in Washington and all over the world are dedicated to that. Sorry, I'm going on a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. Very, very moving, and the connections, you know, of the work that you did until now and continue to do, as you said, even a case now in 2023, and the work on the ground in Ukraine, and pursuing those war criminals. And sadly, that is going to take much of your time in the years to come. So now already streams of questions, lots of questions and comments, but we will park them until Tamir will share with us a view from Israel. And Dr. Tamir Hod is a historian or a historian of World War II and the Holocaust, and he is known very much for his work on the Manyuk. But today actually is going to share with us his new work on a special police unit in Israel, founded in 1960, mainly by survivors, to find those Nazi war criminals wherever they are. Tamir, the floor is yours. We are looking forward to learn from you tonight.
All right, so hello everyone. Tali, thank you very much, and thank you for the partners for inviting me. And I want to say that it's a great honor for me to share the program with Eli, and I think now everyone understands why. I think that the fact that we are joining here and listening to the two sides of the story, there are many sides, the two sides of the story. From one hand, the American side, the OSI, and I'm going to talk about the Israeli side, and you can see that there was like a group of people from all over, especially from Israel, United States, and Germany, that didn't save no effort to chase and to bring those Nazis and Nazis collaborators into trial. And I find it's amazing, and I can tell you many stories about the unit that I'm going to talk about, but we just to begin and see where we get. So if we can open the presentation. Today I would like to talk about research that I consider important, not only historically, but also morally. The research deals with the story of the Israel Police Unit for the investigation of Nazi crimes. The historical importance derives from the work of this unit, which included collecting testimonies of thousands of Holocaust survivors, testimonies that had great contribution to what we know today about the past. From 1960, the year the unit was founded, until the 90s, and maybe even later, when it actually ceased to be an independent unit, its members never stopped tracing and documenting every piece of evidence that could be used to bring Nazi criminals to justice. The moral importance is derived from the historical one. Despite the fact that the importance of the unit cannot be overestimated, almost nothing had been written about this unit. Therefore, in the research as well as in the lecture tonight, there is a taste of a justice for the men and the women of the unit, almost all of whom were Holocaust survivors themselves. I mean, most of the members, not everyone, but most of the members were Holocaust survivors. And I'll just show the next slides, and I will explain exactly with examples. So before approaching the story of the unit and what its role was, I would like to show you photos of several members of the unit and describe what happened to them before they immigrated to Israel and joined the police. That will explain why I had Holocaust survivors' legal retribution to the title. The story of the unit actually have two important points of time. One is the late 50s, when West Germany began to regulate the legal proceeding against Nazi criminals. The second is the end of the 70s, when the wake of law enforcement in the United States regarding Nazi criminals and collaborators who became American citizens. I think that Eli described this period. How was the unit founded? It is interesting to realize that it started from the German side. As someone who studied Israel society and the Holocaust, I can tell you that the state of Israel had other challenges that drew on its limited sources. In 1958, the Central Office of Judicial Administration for the investigation of Nazi crime was established in Germany. And this is a very important point of the story for us. At first, the unit only dealt with the crimes that took place outside of Germany, and a few years later expanded its activities, crimes committed in Germany as well. Further expansion took place after the fall of the Iron Curtain and the reunification of Germany. Just to give an idea of the scope of the work of the unit in Germany, since it was founded, the unit has dealt with over 8,000 investigations. It's just amazing number. Documenting the action of Nazi criminals in preparation for the trial brought the central office to contact the Israeli police in order to help them gather evidence from Holocaust survivors living in Israel. Consequently, a police unit was needed to deal with the increasing number of inquiries from Germany. For that purpose, the unit for the investigation of Nazi crimes was established in the Israeli police. It was the same year Adolf Eichmann was captured and brought to Israel. It's amazing to say that it was almost at the same time. I mean, the famous declaration of Ben Gurion in the Knesset was on the 23rd of May, 1960. And the Israeli unit that I'm speaking about was established between March to May. So those two events together made a big change about collecting those testimony. So this event deeply affected the sentiments of the Israeli society toward the Holocaust. One of the impact was Holocaust survivors who contacted the unit requesting to provide their testimonies. It's amazing. We are talking about hundreds of Holocaust survivors that want to tell their story to the police and bring their testimonies. After they watch, actually, better to say, listen to the Eichmann trial, because there was no television in Israel in those days. Many of the appeals included names of Nazi criminals who could potentially be located and prosecuted. The survivors that worked in that unit played an important role in collecting and documenting the historical records available to us today. Many of the unit members had lost their families in the Holocaust. Their feeling of revenge, they had, if they had some, were translated into long hours of detailed legal work that will lead to proper legal procedures through which it would be possible to bring the perpetrators to justice. And I think that maybe later Eli can give us a little bit from experience, that because he was visiting in Israel, and he can tell you that sometimes we're talking about hours after hours of sitting and listening and collecting those testimonies. And I want to give you just a few numbers about the Israeli unit, because again, friends, it's totally amazing. So in 1961, less than 1 year after the unit established, the members of the unit collected 575 testimonies for the sake of 57 investigations conducted outside of Israel. 3 years after that, in 1964, 2,448 witnesses were interviewed in connection to 130 investigations, most of them overseas. So the numbers are really amazing. In those years, a tremendous effort was made to handle as many cases as possible. The reason was fear of the statute of limitation of Nazi crimes, which was on the agenda of the Germany. Now, Eli talked about, he mentioned words that are very important to our issue, and the word is time. Okay, it's the time. Maybe it's like the most important word to our story, to our case, because you know it's running out, and you have to chase them. And even if not after the Nazi criminals, it's just you still have Holocaust survivors to speak with and to collect their testimonies. So I think that if we are talking about those numbers, I mean, later on in Germany, we can talk about the trial in the Treblinka trials that took place in Germany, and another one. The 60s were like really busy, and I can say that only the beginning of the 70s there is a lull in the work, but right after that came the story of United States and hunting Nazis and Nazis collaborators, and it's totally different. Monitoring the personal files of the members of the unit indicates thousands of official flights permits that were given to them in order to testify in the trials in which they were involved. So most of the members of the unit, they usually also testify in the different trials around the world, in USA and in Germany. And I must share this information because I have all those files of the members, and I'm telling you that if you will open one files, you can think that they're in the air. I mean, all the time they were in the air, because there are so many requests to their commanders. They have to be in Germany here, and in Austria there, and in the United States after that, and it's totally amazing. And they weren't young fellows, okay? They weren't young fellows. In the early 70s, after 72, there was, as I said, a relative lull in the work of the unit, but this changed quite quickly toward the end of that decade, and that has to do with the United States. Immediately after the war, about 20,000 Nazi criminals and collaborators, I think these are the numbers, arrived in the United States. Despite the amazing figure, until the 70s, only 9 cases were opened. And Eli knows well Ellen Ryan, and I remember him saying that, trying to explain why it happened. And then he said, yeah, I got the answer. We killed Hitler, now we've got Stalin. These were his words. And I see from the small screen that Eli is agree with him. So in the mid-70s, as most of you aware, if you heard about the Demianu case, a list arrived to the United States with thousands of names of American citizens who immigrated after the war. They were suspected of collaborating with the Nazis during the war. 2 of the names that appeared on the list were John Demjanjuk and Fyodor Fedorenko. The law enforcement authorities in the United States quickly contacted the Nazi Crimes Investigation Unit, and I don't have the presentation in front of me, but one of a very important person in the unit was Miriam Redifker, okay, if we can go back to the second slide, I really want you to meet them, to meet the members. So, and I know that Eli knows some of them, but just for a short description. Number 1 is Menachem Rusek, friend of Eli, and to explain to you what does it mean, retribution, a legal retribution. Menachem Rusek stayed more than 3 years in Lodz Ghetto, and after that in Auschwitz. Okay, let's talk about Miriam Redifker below him, number 9. Miriam Redifker lost her first husband during the war. She tried to escape to Russia with her mom and her little brother. And during the escape, the Luftwaffe bombed them and her little brother died. Let's go to number 6, Naftali Drashkovich. Naftali was more than 4 years in a labor camp. And after that, I mean, he had few collapses, and I will explain later about their health condition and how it's affected. Another friend of Eli, number 2, Martin Kolar, was a partisan in Czechoslovakia for many years, really hero guy, and worked in this unit for almost 20 years. Number 12, Arie Orbach, a partisan from Vilno, 22 years in the unit, thousands of cases, just amazing. So if we can move forward, you can see the lineup, and it will be the exact point where I am. Another one, please. Okay, this is a very famous one, and so Redivker Miriam of the unit held the lineup during which several Treblinka survivors pointed to the Mianic photo and shouted that this was Ivan the Terrible from Treblinka. Another lineup was held in 1978, then under the direction of Martin Koller, I just mentioned. In 1978, Miriam and Martin traveled to, with the Treblinka survivors, they traveled to United States and testified in the denaturalization trial of Fyodor Fedorenko. And just to explain to you the role of the unit, it's not only to collect those testimonies, it's also to take care of those survivors, because I have a document that Martin Kolar is sending to Eli friends and ask them that in the next trial, the judge will behave kindly to the survivors, because it wasn't like that during Fedorenko trial. And if it won't be like that, so he won't be able to send more survivors to testify, because they were like really traumatic after the trial. But that was at the end of the 70s. Following the influx of more and more names of suspects who lived in the United States, it was decided in 1979 to establish the OSI, which included lawyers, historians, and others who worked day and night in the investigation of Nazi criminals and collaborators. The communication between the units was intensive, and in the police archive in Israel, you can find hundreds of letters that were sent between the units. It's really amazing. I mean, to see that, that's why I said in the beginning that I met Eli in many files, because it's amazing to see how many letters between those units. And if we can share the screen, I brought a few examples. Okay, so just to notice, I mean, how important this unit was, and how, for example, Menachem Rusek was dedicated to the work. You can see here, and I think I mentioned Elizabeth Holtzman. She was very involved in this issue, and you can see what she's writing to Menachem. And Tali, even if it won't work, I'll just read from my screen and it will be okay. So she's writing, Dear Superintendent Rusek, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to meet with me during my trip to Israel, and to assure you that I have followed up the very important issue you raised during the discussion. I hope by now you have heard directly, from United States as to the status of the cases you brought to my attention. Because of your concern, I asked for and received commitments from both Mr. Mendelssohn and Commissioner of Immigration Castillo that additional staff will be hired immediately to enable the task force to handle more promptly the evidence you and others provide. I emphasized to the commissioner that the ages of the defendants and the witnesses made this an absolute necessity. So I mentioned before that how important was the time. And this is another one. This office wishes to express its warm gratitude to you for the assistance of Menachem Rusek, of your staff during the time he was in Chicago. We are talking about the trial of Frank Wallace, and another one from 1982, and I think this is the visit that Eli took part of it, and Dear Menachem, I originally set out to write this letter in order to relay to you some excellent news and explain about one of the cases. And you can see here, as I said, on the last day of our work at your headquarters last month, Rod, Eli, and I felt very much as though we were among good friends in Yafo. I would be honored if you would consider us allies as well. Please convey again to your excellent staff our sincere gratitude and very warmest regards, Neil Sher. And what I wanted to say, it's quite amazing because you will think that this unit, and you will think, right, was so important, but sometimes there was like a huge gap between what they have done and how they contribute those trials and the condition they were working here in Israel. For instance, you can see from Martin Mendelssohn is writing to Menachem, I was delighted to read the article about you that appeared in the November 26, 1982 edition of Yediot Achronot. It's the biggest newspaper in Israel. And I'm glad that you are finally getting the recognition that you deserved, and hope that that everyone will finally realize that whatever success is achieved in the United States is directly attributable to you and other members of your excellent unit in the Israeli National Police. I give you another example. At 1985, Menachem Rusek participated in the national team that trying to see what came up with the destiny of Mengele. And when he's coming back, he's writing immediately a paper to his commander and said that he had to meet him because he learned that during his travel to Germany, they took the only car that the unit had. And you have to understand that it's the most important tool of the unit because they have to reach all over the country to collect the testimonies from the survivors. As Eli mentioned before, and as I said, the work was really hard, and it was really like to open the wound each time they were talking with those survivors. So just will present you with a statistic that may not surprise anyone. Many of the men that you saw in the first slide in that unit, they had a heart attack during their service. In addition to that, there were other complex medical problems. I mentioned earlier Miriam Redivker, and I want to quote words that she said in an interview right after a testimony she gave in the Demyanuk trial in Israel. I'm talking about 1987. She was 81 years old. And that's what she said. And I think it's very important to listen to that and to see what they were facing with. I can't say that I was always able to completely detach. If I told you that I would come home, prepare lunch or dinner, and go to the theater with my husband, then what? Does that mean that I did not lie down all night afterwards and think about the investigation I conducted that day? Of course I did. And certainly there were nightmares. You sit for hours, days, years, and hear tough stories. There were certainly mood swings. More than once, I would jump out of bed at night and go to see if my daughter was still asleep in bed. Well, there is a lot to tell about the heroic acts of the units, including action that characterize impressive action movies. And of course, everything will appear in the book I'm writing about this unit. Nevertheless, I would like to conclude with the words of another member of the unit, Aryeh Orbach, 22 years, one of the senior investigators in the unit, who is credits with assisting in thousands of convictions of Nazi criminals. And I quote, and I will end with that. The Nazi crime investigations unit played a crucial part in the investigation of Nazi crimes. The Israel police did a lot in apprehending Nazi criminals over time. Thanks to the dedicated team, that worked hard to gather testimony from Holocaust survivors. Hundreds of Nazi criminals were caught and prosecuted. For 22 years, I worked in this section. During my years of work, I collected a lot of evidence and conducted many investigations against various Nazi criminals. During these years, many witnesses revealed their horrors in ghettos, labor camps, and concentration camps. In many cases, witnesses collapsed and fainted during the interrogation and could not hold out while they told me what happened to them during the Holocaust. I devoted myself with all my might to this holy cause and had great satisfaction in learning that this or that criminal had been caught and prosecuted thanks to my investigation. End of quote. And Tali, I think that today many scholars ask me about what will happen next. I mean, we know that we almost have no survivors, and probably, at least in Israel, there won't be another trial. And if I have to summarize, like in one sentence, I think I will use Josh Loftus from the OSI, which say that it's maybe too late to do justice, but it's never too late to discover the truth. And even if we can't put them on trial, for me as historian, to read those documents and to learn more about what happened and to tell that, and much of those stories collected by this amazing unit, and I'm sure that Eli can approve what I just stated. And yeah, so thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Tamir, and I really apologize. I'm not sure what was going on with the PowerPoint, but it's demolished my computer 3 times, one after the other. So, but what I wanted to reflect on, that, you know, you, the historian, Eli, you spoke so much about the historians. It wasn't the detectives, the marathon men, you know, running in the streets of New York, you know, or I was thinking about the boys from Brazil. All sorts of horror images came to my mind as you were speaking about the marathon men. And I was thinking about the work that Tamir is doing work as a historian on a unit that no one knew about, that no one wrote about, and it's bringing the two of you so well together. The other thing that I would like to open with, because we have so many comments and questions, and I'm going to pose some questions to both of you, but the fact, Tamir, that you spoke about the survivors. It was the survivors that were doing the chasing. It was the survivors that were dedicating their life, going back home, you know, after a difficult day, and kissing their kids goodnight and trying to put the nightmares back somewhere. And Eli certainly is a child of survivors, and I myself also as a child of survivors. We do have to pay homage to the bravery and courage of those survivors that did it for so many years, 20 odd years for some of them. So maybe I'll start with actually a question that is something that I know both of you are also working with, and that is from Professor Beverly Chalmers, that is asking, were any attempts made to prosecute Jews who had committed crimes during the Holocaust, or only Nazis? And any one of you can start. Of course, we know about the Kapo trials, but maybe elaborate more about this topic. So I don't know, Tamir, maybe in Israel, anything about that, and then maybe Eli about the United States and further.
You want me to start? So I'll just say from the Israel side that we know that there were 40 cases of trials against couples, or what you can say as collaborators. And the last one was in 1964, Bertal Hirsch. And I think and maybe it's also we join the answer that the reason again was the influence of the Eichmann trial. because what the Eichmann trial caused is that the judges started to understand that they can't really judge that. I mean, there's no law school that teach you how to deal with that, because when we are talking about the couples, we are always talk about the gray zone, and the gray zone is really wide when we speak about this issue. So in Israel there were only 40 cases, and to understand what I'm talking about, that there's no really way to put it on trial. Also the punishment. I mean, sometimes you describe what they've done or what they were accused in, and then you go into the punishment and you see that they got like few months, okay? Or I just want to mention, if I can, like in a few seconds, it reminds me the story of the Mianyuk, because Ila, you know that they couldn't try him for what they've done in the Holocaust, only for cheating on his citizenship form. So it's amazing to read what the court decided in 1981. There's 40 pages of verdict, and then you can read 39 and a half with the most horrible things that your eyes can see. And in the end, so we stripped him from his citizenship, you know? So the gap is amazing. And in some way, that's what happened here in Israel. I mean, the description was horrible to read it, you know, it's bringing you into nightmare. But then how can you try him? That because he was also a victim and a prisoner. So so I think the maximum was, there was a death penalty to Ingestel, but like in a short time they changed it to 2 years, and he was very healed, so he just passed away shortly after that.
Eli? Yes. Can you? Yeah.
You're on mute, Eli.
All right. While you... No? Yeah, something is going on in tonight's Zoom for some reason. Let's see. Do you want to try and leave and come back? And I think that will be good. And okay.
Talim, may I ask a follow up? Tamir,
Of course, Beverly.
just while we're waiting for Eli.
Eli, sure.
Tamir, if I recall in some of my readings, and I haven't studied this in any depth, those trials results or findings were embargoed for 70 years or something, 60, 70 years, am I right? And have they been released, the actual proceedings of those trials?
So we're talking about the couple trials, yeah? So
yes, a couple of trials.
Yeah, all right. So there's it took time that those sources were available, and there's a great book now by Rivka Brot. I don't know if it's already translated to English, but I recommend it warmly. It's bringing the main cases. It's talking about the gray zone. I think it's also in the title, and I can send Tali the link, and you can read about it. Yes, but it took time to find those files. I think that one of the first that deal with that was my supervisor, Professor Hannah Yablonka. But I want also to take you to my educator job for many years, and the history teacher. We didn't mention that in high school, you know, no one talked about it. It was a really sensitive issue to deal with. So that also came up only lately. Now when I'm teaching students, some of them, like, you know, they're so surprised. They said, what, it can't be. To me as a scholar, I mean, it's amazing because I deal with that every day. But it's amazing to hear young students, 22, 23, said, I never heard about it here in Israel. So I think it's answer to your question. Yes, we didn't deal with that, and the sources weren't available for many years.
Thank you. It's very much a taboo subject. Yeah.
It's also a very sensitive case, because I know in person that there is one case that a colleague went to give a lecture in a kibbutz here in Israel about this issue, about the couples. And someone ran to her before she got into the class and asked her not to talk about someone because his son lives in the kibbutz and he will be present in the lecture. So don't talk about it, okay? So you understand it's a very sensitive issue here in Israel.
Beverly,
Very difficult.
I just posted another research about the couple trials, not only in Israel but beyond, also in Poland and in other countries by Professor Mark Drumble, and that came out in 2016, and he wrote quite a lot about it after that. So just for your interest, and I see Eli is back, and what I would like to ask Eli if he is back and with us. Erica, we will need your help, and Jackie.
We're trying to. We can't spotlight him.
Yeah, the Zoom is not behaving tonight. Try to co-host him, and then yes. And then he will come back.
Another book for all of you. Just forgot, he's a good friend of mine. Professor Dan Porat, Bitter Reconing, Israel Tries Holocaust Survivors as Nazi Collaborators. Also really recommended.
Yeah, and that's a later book, actually.
Yeah. Professor Dan Porat from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem.
Absolutely. All right, so while we're waiting for Eli, and he can always come back to the question, maybe a question to you, Tamir. Did you manage to interview any of the survivors on the unit? Are any of them still alive, and or their descendants, families? And can you talk a little bit about that, about the fact that survivors were the Nazi hunters?
So the members that you saw their photos, unfortunately, all of them not with us. Menachem Rusek, actually, I think he was the last survivors. He passed away in 2007. There is the young generation, Miri Drucker, but this is like an evolution of the unit. And she gave a service to different units around the world. Like, for example, she went to work with the Australian unit of hunting Nazis and in Britain. But for your question, the interviews were usually with the families. I can give you an example. I spoke with Tammy. She's the daughter of Martin Kohler, I mentioned before. And it's amazing. It was an amazing interview because she told me that she could tell by the number of the cigarettes her father smoked how hard the case was. I mean, like, she was looking from the side, and the number of the cigarettes told her how hard the case was. Also, he tried a few times to quit, and she knew that when he failed, it was because of a hard case. Another example, the son of Menachem Rusek. So I spoke with him for many hours, and it's amazing because Menachem Rusek was deeply in the story of Mengele, and he was sure that Mengele is still alive. He couldn't accept what the international team decided. As we heard, Tali, remember 2 or 3 years ago from David Mowell. He couldn't accept that, and his son told me that he thinks that it's one of the causes of his death. Because, and why? It wasn't really rational, but he couldn't accept the fact that he didn't put his hands on Mengele. And think about it, Menachem Rusek, Lodz Ghetto, Auschwitz, you know what it meant for him. So we have their families and many documentations that the family keep, and we have a really amazing police archive here in Israel that supply all those materials. Some of them I show you this evening.
Can I be heard now?
Oh, Eli.
I'm back. I had to turn off the whole computer. So I know we're almost out of time. Can I just say a few things? So
absolutely,
I heard the
absolutely.
tail end of what Tamir said about Colonel Rusek, Menachem, and Mengele. Menachem was a very steady state kind of person. Kept his emotions to, under wraps mostly, except when the name Mengele was said. He would grit his teeth, his face would get red. He never, ever, I'm sure Mengele was never far from his thoughts. It was very touching. I wanted to also say a few other things. First, by way of correction, I know Esther considers me a child of survivors. My parents were escapees from Germany. They did not consider themselves survivors. They did not live through those horrors. So I also do not consider myself to be a child of survivors. I do want to associate myself with Mrs. Bedifker's recollections about the toll that this kind of work takes on you, and that it does. It's at night when it's quiet that it comes back to you and hits you hardest. The fact that so many of the officers in the Israeli police unit, unsung heroes, they will probably remain until Tamir's book comes out, that so many of them were survivors, meant that when they started interviewing survivors, which, as he said, they did in huge numbers, they kind of grafted the survivors' nightmares onto their own. They already had more than anyone should ever have experienced, and then they took those on as well. I wanted to also make the point, I was talking about political will, and I do want to say, as far as how many Nazis came to the United States, no one really knows. The same way we couldn't begin to tell you how many rapists there are in the United States. No one really knows. It's certainly at least hundreds. Whoever says that he knows is making it up. But if there's a study that was done looking at the period 1990 to early 2010, so coinciding with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the last 20 years in which it was possible to bring a large number of these cases. And during that period, my former office, OSI, won 68 of those cases. The whole rest of the world combined won 46. Is that because my colleagues were so great? Well, they were and are. But is it because more Nazis were living in the United States than in Germany and Austria? No, of course not. Most of the perpetrators stayed where they always were, in Germany and in Austria. What was absent was political will. It's almost embarrassing that we would win all these cases, many times more than even Germany in that period. But when the political will isn't there, that's what happens. And the result of it was that the vast majority of the perpetrators of Nazi crimes got away with their crimes. Only a small minority ever were prosecuted. That's a tragedy. That is yet another offense against the victims of the Shoah and their families. And that historic pattern of impunity for what we today call the core international crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, that has to end. If there's to be any hope for the world, it has to end. We're seeing in Ukraine, where Russia has launched a war of aggression and is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity on a scale not seen in armed conflicts since World War II itself. What the consequences are of letting someone, in this case Putin, get away with it in prior instances of aggression. The fate of the world and the rule of law are really at stake here. I also just wanted to add one last thing, which is that we received over the years really outstanding help from not only from the Israeli police, not only from law enforcement authorities in Germany, the investigative authorities in other countries, but I also want to single out Yad Vashem, the Jerusalem United States Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington, and your colleagues at the Justice Ministry in the state of Israel.
So indeed, we ran out of time, sadly, but maybe a very quick question to both of you that came up a few times, and that is, how do you feel about this? For both of you to do this type of work, how do you feel when you look at the perpetrators, record or face, in your case, Eli? And someone else asked, did you have ever threats on your life? for the work that you're doing. So Tamir, not to you as a historian, but certainly Eli as an activist on the ground.
We had some threats over the years, and thank goodness no one acted on those. We knew that a lot of the people we were investigating had guns, because some of them had committed suicide with those guns when they found out that we were investigating them. I must say, it gave one pause when dropping in on the home of a suspect, not knowing, how they might come out. Door opened. There is sort of a general sense that these are, elderly, infirm people. But during the key years when we were doing this, they weren't. In the first decade or so, the average age of one of our suspects was the age that I'm at now. And I hope I don't look old and decrepit. I hope I look like I could take care of myself if I had to. I hope I don't have to. I'll close with one thought, which is some of viewers may have noticed that on Friday, after the International Criminal Court charged President Vladimir Putin and another Russian official with war crimes for the abduction of thousands and thousands of Ukrainian children. Horrible. A senior Ukrainian official, a Russian official, warned publicly that, a hypersonic missile might fall on the International Criminal Court building in The Hague. So working in a building that is similarly vulnerable to a missile that travels at the speed of 2.5 miles per second, I think what we will do is not tell the Russians which are our in-office days for work in Washington.
And Tamir, maybe last words about how do you feel when you work with these perpetrators' files? You worked with Demaniuk for so many years, but with others as well.
Just a quick note, or maybe it's even a part of the question, that Eli mentioned the fact that the majority of the Nazis succeeded to escape. So I think that the years between 46 to 58 were critic time, and I will leave you with that. And we need to think about it. Those 12 years they were really critic, with whom we could catch or not later. As I said at the beginning of my lecture about the unit that I'm investigating now, I really feel I'm doing some kind of justice, because it's amazed me at the beginning to think about it, that no one really wrote about them or did a deep research, because the contribution to what we know about the Holocaust here in Israel, at least, it's just amazing. I mean, just to open the files and to see how many interviews they made, how many testimonies they collected, and you can learn all the story from that since 1960 until the 90s. Believe me, I need 3 or 4 lifetimes to do that, and I have to decide what I'm focusing. And as you know, of course, I'm a 3rd generation of Holocaust survivors, and it's always going with me. Yes, I think that's, of course, it's interesting, but it's also some kind of justice to those very unique unit and those members. I'm going to write about each one of them. We'll get a focus in my book.
Can I just add, I predicted at the outset that I would learn a lot from Tamir, and I think that prediction has certainly come to pass. Please don't take several lifetimes to write this book. It's important. I want to see it in my lifetime. So I think the Hebrew is maher, right? Fast.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Good.
Thank you so much. Apologies to everyone for your wonderful questions that we just simply could not get to. I will send Eli and Tamir all your comments and your questions, just to see the richness of the conversation and the interest in what you do. And from my side, just to say grateful thanks for all you have done. Eli, you are an inspiration. We give you much strength in the work that you have to do now, as we watch with horror the continued war against Ukraine. And Tamir, thank you so much for opening a window to a history that we did not know, and looking very much forward to read your book and to know more about it. And to all of you, thank you for joining. Looking very much forward to welcoming you again next month, 27th of April, when we have a wonderful conversation with Bjorn Pronsdorfer about the Holocaust and education. And Erica, back to you.
Well, thank you, Tali, for helping us with fielding all the questions. And I also want to thank again Eli Rosenbaum and Tamir Hod for this fascinating and sometimes very personal look at this topic of Nazi war criminals from the perspective of both Israel and the US. It's so tragic that Mr. Rosenbaum's work is still relevant today, but I know that we are grateful for what you and your department do. And we'll be very much looking forward to Tamir's book as well. So I hope you'll keep us posted on that. We apologize for the technical difficulties which occurred despite our troubleshooting prior to the session. Sometimes you just can't help what the gremlins in the interwebs will do. So thank you again. We'll look forward to seeing you on the 27th, as Tali mentioned. The link for each session remains the same. So if you had trouble with the email, some people do, you can just copy this link in your calendar for next month and you'll be able to join then. We wish you, no, this has gone a bit over, but it's really been so fascinating. So I know apologies with people that couldn't stay, but they can see the recording. Again, if you would like to support our virtual programs, for those of you who are come from around the world and have access to this, we so appreciate it. You can go to our website. I just put the link in the chat. We wish you to stay safe and healthy. And if we don't see you beforehand, Azus and Pesach to everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.